And good evening, and welcome to the 5280 podcast. I'm the host for the night, sitting in for Mike, Glenn Hauser, and I'm here with Cam Parker and Gage Madrid. Fellas, hope you've had a happy holiday season. Merry Christmas. How's everything going tonight?
Yeah, everything's good. We had a really good Merry Christmas in terms of spending with the family and of course getting the gifts that Santa brought us, right? Getting the gifts that Santa brought us, and I maybe because of the Broncos season, I will say was maybe lucky that I didn't get mini Broncos stuff or mini Broncos related stuff. So maybe that was kind of a good thing in the way that all things played out. We'll talk about the game a little bit later, but there was one Bronco gift I will say that I did get that I certainly enjoyed, and Glenn, you'll know this. I got Mike Kliss's book, The Top 50 Greatest Bronco Players in team history. So I'm really looking forward to taking a deep dive on that. And but all in all, I thought it was great. Went to the game obviously, and I know Gage went as well, but got the chance to spend it with my dad, and those are irreplaceable moments, going to a Christmas game in the freezing cold weather of Empower Field, and go for a Christmas game, I guess. So in that kind of vein, it was a bit irreplaceable.
Absolutely, man. Even with that loss, it was still a very incredible atmosphere at Mile High on Christmas Eve night. The stadium was lit up with all the fans on their phones. The Broncos had an interactive light show before the game. They had a really cool light show during halftime. The atmosphere, it felt like a playoff game, even though it didn't go the Broncos' way. That whole energy in the stadium from the comeback was really, really cool to be a part of. And that's an experience I wouldn't trade for the world. And even this whole season, despite it maybe not ending the way that the Broncos are hoping it would, I still have a lot of really awesome memories that I'm going to take away from this year. So that game was kind of a microcosm of this entire Broncos season, if you want to look at it that way.
Great. And we will obviously we'll dig into the game, but big news today. One of our captains actually is no longer a member of or is not coming back as a member of the Broncos. Kareem Jackson, who the Broncos let go of the other day because they couldn't elevate him to the 53-man roster, and they had every intention of bringing him back to the practice squad, has gone home. He's going back to the Houston Texans. He has a chance to make a playoff run with his old team. Guys, what do you think of this move?
I think it's a great move for him, man. It's a teammate of his in D'Amico Ryans that he's reuniting with. It's a city that absolutely loves and adores him, much like Denver does. If there was any place I feel like Kareem would have entertained wanting to go to, it's Houston, because of all those special connections there and what the Texans are building. So I know the Broncos really intended on bringing Kareem Jackson back for the final two games. They even terminated the practice squad contract of defensive back Keon Smith in order to bring K-Jack back. But when given the option of going to Houston, reuniting with D'Amico Ryans, being a veteran leader in that locker room versus basically losing your job in Denver, although you would still very much be a veteran leader in our locker room, I feel like it was just a very easy decision for Kareem to make. So this was awesome, man, because I know it was ultimately the Texans' decision to make. They put the waiver claim in, but Kareem also, I felt like, had some influence in making this decision as to where he wanted to go.
Yeah, and I was going to say it does make you wonder a little bit. I'm not trying to say that, the Broncos, didn't claim him or something, but it almost made it like in terms of the waiver wire, but almost like part of me feels like with it being Houston and Denver is that, truthfully, like he went unclaimed, but then he was actually deciding between the Houston Texans and the Denver Broncos about like where things were currently standing. And, he went with the Houston Texans. That's just pure speculation on my part. But kudos to Kareem. He really has established himself, as genuinely one of the good guys. I know that, his season did not go according to plan, really. He's a guy that if you were to plug and play back in the 1990s, right, like he would flourish like no other. And this season was a prime example of just how enforcer of a safety he is at that position. And, so much so that I think, we tend to get a little bit lost about what happened this year and forget about what happened, in some of the years prior with Kareem. And, because I think back to when Darian Stewart was here in part of the no-fly zone and that safety room and what the Broncos were planning to have happen that day, right? As far as, upgrading the safety position. There were some strong rumors that were out there that they were going to go really hard after Adrian Amos, right? They didn't sign Adrian Amos. They went out and signed Kareem Jackson that day, and lo and behold, he became a fixture of that secondary, and he allowed the team to groom. He allowed people to groom the young safety, unit that we currently see it as constructed right now. I mean, he groomed guys like Justin Simmons to the player that he is now. He's groomed Caden Stearns to the player that he is now. So I mean, like, there's BJ Locke, especially, who we can all agree. I know we said, Kareem, the way things are going, PJ Locke deserved that chance to start, right? And it's because of how he played and because of the grooming and the leadership that Kareem provided. So, I mean, there's so much things, and now we get the opportunity with Kareem gone to maybe, and I say maybe, possibly get the chance to see J.L. Skinner these final few games. So just, it's bittersweet to a certain extent because you certainly do not want a guy like that to leave your locker room, but it allows you to get a chance to see those younger guys and those younger guys flourish in a system like that and maybe play at a higher level.
No, I didn't think the Broncos were going to have a roadblock or have any competition for him. I honestly thought that the two suspensions for the year, would have scared off another team. So this came as a little bit of a surprise, but the fact that it's Houston, and ironically enough, the most memorable game for Kareem Jackson in a Broncos uniform was his return to Houston, where he absolutely had just an amazing game. Ask D-Hop how that went.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
man,
it's
that he delivered on him, man. That was nasty.
And the fumble return, it was just, the guy was, he was a true leader for the Broncos. And like Cam said, we can't let some of the misguided moments of this year overshadow what he meant to this team. And quite honestly, what he meant to someone like a Justin Simmons. I think Justin even retweeted the Broncos goodbye to Kareem and mentions that they were brothers for life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I wish him well. I hope he gets in, and who knows if the Texans are going to make the playoffs, and who knows if he plays another year. I think he still wants to play. But K-Jack, we're gonna miss you in Broncos country, and best of luck down in H-Town for sure.
Absolutely.
So that brings us to a game that I argued with everybody that it was not a trap game, that this was going to be an absolute walkover. It played into the Broncos' hands, the worst offense in the league, and the New England Patriots with a backup quarterback, with a receiving core that was very, just non-existent for many games out of the year. Their top running back was hurt. Their top tight end was out of the game. So it was just, it all played for the Broncos. And guys, you got to tell me, as two people that were in the stadium, 7 seconds in, DJ Jones bursts through the line, tattoos Bailey Zappi, and gets a fumble, and the Broncos have it for a goal. What was that like when that happened?
Do you want to go, Gage? Yeah.
No, go.
Yeah, I was gonna say we were on cloud nine. I mean, the whole stadium was kind of on cloud nine because you can't script something like that. Well, I guess maybe the NFL, right? The NFL can script something like that. But as far as
script writers in their bag, man.
Right. But just you were on cloud nine on something like that. I mean, DJ Jones of all people too. And DJ Jones has played better in the last handful of weeks. But I mean, man, what the start of the game, like to tee it all off, if you will, and then to have that happen, to get the turnover, to get back to the turnover ways, and get that turnover on literally the first play of the game. But unfortunately, things just snowballed after that. And right after that, I mean, the team really sputtered in the red zone, and they didn't score a single touchdown. So much so that, they went forward on fourth down, didn't get a chance to take the points, and gave it right back to Bailey Zappi and the New England Patriots offense. Now, I will say if to play a little bit of it, I actually like the fact to go forward there, just given the fact of that situation, a moment of to put Bailey Zappi there on like the 1 yard line and have him move down the field, of course. And, so I thought it was a really smart decision. I understand, taking points off the board, but at least that early on in the game, I don't mind us, of course, going forward on all 4 downs, but on the offensive side of that, you got to convert in all single one of those downs. And it was the whole down and distance was such a disaster, so much so it couldn't even have been more of a disaster if Russ actually threw that interception. And I don't know if it was just that, they were cold themselves coming out of the tunnel, right? That they were just frozen. They weren't even warm yet and game ready. But like they were just on their toes at the beginning of the game offensively.
Yep. And then Javonte getting stonewalled on the goal line on 4th down. You just cannot have that kind of stuff happen, man. If you're going to be aggressive and go for it, just like Cam says, you have to convert, because ultimately that decision not to take the points, you could argue, is what cost the Broncos the game, because it was 26-23, a 3-point game. You take the points in that scenario, maybe the entire game doesn't start to spiral from the get-go, because how the momentum of game can just completely shift after a bad start like that. And that's what it felt like happened. The Broncos were not able to really get out of that funk. And yeah, they actually went into halftime leading 7-3. And then the end of the third quarter was just an absolute disaster. First, they give up a field goal, and then they give up 2 touchdowns. If I'm not mistaken, that's how the sequence went. Obviously, the double fumble by Marvin Mims was just inexcusable. That is something that cannot happen, man. And that showcases why Marvin Mims probably isn't seeing a whole lot of playing time. That, and he's just not getting open versus zone coverage. He's not really getting open on routes other than go routes. It's really been kind of a disaster for Marvin Mims. Yeah, he had a nice catch later in the game to kind of quote unquote redeem himself, but I still feel like Marvin Mims was not playing up to par in that game.
And the missed opportunity of it all. I mean, Broncos really had a chance to be up 7-0 inside 1 minute of the game, and for that, you mentioned the near interception. I mean, that would have been a bigger backbreaker than just not making it. Mm-hmm. And it's nonsense. And Whiskey mentioned, Javonte, the play call wasn't a bad play call at all. It was, what's interesting is like a DNVR today, Todd was, sketching out the plays, and he was explaining why it was a really good play, and just it was one of those things where Javonte tripped up and came up short. But it's unfortunate, those types of turnovers. The mindset that we're going to have them on they're going to have to go 98 yards. I don't love that mindset. I like the mindset of like, let's punch this in and see what happens. But you mentioned those mistakes. Broncos did also have a fumble by Javonte, but it really looked like it was picked up by Ben Powers. What's the explanation for that not being overturned?
The guess is as good as mine. I mean, when it is clear as day that Ben Powers has the ball, in possession, and a Patriots player or another player rips it from you, you're not the one that had control previously. It was the person that ripped the ball out of the hand who now has possession. And so it's like, and also too, like, this is when it gets to be the inconsistencies and something we've talked about ad nauseum about the referees. It's like, this is the case where, to Gage's point, when we had that conversation, it's like, you do have to have this conversation about how we can accurately call things, because what's the point of review? What is the point of review if you're going to go forward and review it when it is clear as day, when thousands and thousands of people that are not even Bronco fans are watching this game, and they can clearly tell that Ben Powers had possession of the football, and then the Patriots player came in and stole it from underneath him, and he has possession? Like, it doesn't make any lick of sense. And so when you want to talk about, and I'll use a really buzzword here, integrity. when you want to talk about the integrity of the game, it loses. The referees lose their integrity when stuff like this happens because you question everything at that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the inconsistencies of this kind of stuff being enforced is so frustrating. And we had this conversation in the last show about how this stuff can be more consistently enforced. But if you're going to take it to replay, you have to get it right. And they didn't get it right. It's frustrating as all hell. And the stadium was livid. They were booing the refs for a good 5 minutes loudly. I don't know if they could hear it on the broadcast, but you probably had to have, because it was insane how pissed off Broncos fans were. And even some Patriots fans that I were next to, they said, yeah, no, I don't think that's a legitimate call right there. Ben Powers very clearly jumped on top of that ball, and the Patriots defender comes in, rips it out from underneath him, and they give him possession of it. I don't understand how something as simple and routine as that can get missed. It's so infuriating.
Well, and there was another play, I'm sure you guys saw, but it was, the play where, the ball possibly hit Jerry Jeudy in the hands, but there was a very blatant, obvious pass interference on that sideline with Jerry Jeudy where he probably could have caught it, but he was on him the entire way. He was on him the entire way, where it was pretty obvious that, that it seemed like a penalty, but again, that's a very lesser situation compared to Ben Powers, diving on a football. So that just makes it worse and amplifies it just that much more. So it just really, and I don't know if it's just about the NFL loves the Patriots, because trust me, if they love the Patriots, they would not be, 4-11 right now. They would not be 4-11 if they loved the Patriots.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the
They
Patriots
love
have
Tom
a kicker.
Brady.
Patriots have a kicker right now, Chad Ryland, and he's had a terrible year. He's a rookie, just a horrendous outing, and the argument could be made that had they kept Nick Folk, they could be knocking on the door for perhaps making the playoffs this year, because so many kicks have gone south. And Gage mentioned the third quarter just being a disaster for the Broncos, and sure enough. Reason why I bring up Ryland is Ezekiel Elliott makes that touchdown. Ryland misses the extra point. So it's all right, this is good. That's usually a good sign for something playing in the hands of the other team. And then in the last minute and a half, essentially at the 1:34 mark, Gesicki gets an 11-yard pass from Zappe. And then 6 seconds later, that's where the Marvin Mims fumble was. Mm-hmm. And so they scored, and they converted on both of those extra points. They scored 14 points in 6 seconds, and that's a true backbreaker entering the fourth quarter at 23-7. But in Broncos form, they did not give up. And if you guys could tell us a little bit about your perspective from that fourth quarter and coming back and the 2-point conversions and such.
Go ahead, Judge. Go ahead.
No, go.
So I just think that, and this is something Gage and I briefly talked a little bit about before we hit record, and it's like, it's one of those famous questions you asked yourselves, right? It's like, why can't you do this for 4 quarters, right? Like, why can't you do this for 4 quarters? And the thing to, if you want to peel it back even more, it's like, well, the reason why you did is because you dug yourself into that hole for you to create this opportunity for yourself. It should never resort to the fact that you're down to 16 points, 17 points, that you become this let Russ cook, team, if you will, like where he can be able to see the field a little bit accurately, use the middle of the field, be able to stretch the field, which is something that Russ really, really struggled with after Courtland Sutton went down. Like after Courtland Sutton went down, I'm not saying that, say Courtland Sutton is a game-changing wide receiver, because that is a conversation we do need to have, is that the Broncos need truthfully a game-changing wide receiver, at that position. But what I am saying that is Courtland Sutton, when he went out, the whole thing changed. And like when he went out, like they weren't able to stretch the field. The passes down the field were few and far between, except for maybe the one to Marvin Mims. I mean, the shot to Jerry Jeudy, like it was very few and far between. And to make even matters worse was the running game was suffering. And the one thing I would be very curious to know, as far as even with that running game, is why was the lack of use of Samaje Perine in that first half?
One
That was
carry.
going to be my next point.
Entire game.
Yeah.
One damn carry. That was literally going to be my next point. Like, why aren't you utilizing Samaje Perine in the run game? I believe he had 5 receptions, but 1 carry. He has shown that he has really good vision and really good explosiveness and has fresh legs. Javonte Williams at times feels like he's running with cinder blocks on his shoes. It's so frustrating, and the lack of vision, the lack of burst from Javonte, it's just been really frustrating to watch him, especially in the Detroit game. I haven't evaluated the All-22 yet on the New England game. I plan on doing that probably tonight, but I feel like at this point you have a dynamic option in the backfield that you aren't utilizing, and that is a testament to some of the shortcomings of Sean Payton as a coach. And in this game, he got outcoached by Bill Belichick. In his previous game, he got outcoached by his own protege in Dan Campbell. Some of the offensive game planning has been questionable. The screen game has been really, really frustrating for the Denver Broncos, and they keep going back to that well, even when it's not working. The run game has been abysmal. It feels like you're not letting Russell Wilson do what he thrives doing at times. I thought that when given a chance to actually operate in a little bit of chaos in the end of the game, he thrived. But Sean Payton is set on keeping the early handcuffs on Russell Wilson. And I understand he gives you those jitters because he sacks himself. There's a play that Cam and I were talking about pre-record where literally he has a dig route coming open from Jerry Jeudy. He spins out of a clean pocket into a sack. It was absolutely embarrassing. And those are the kind of plays where you sit here and say the Broncos can no longer move forward with Russell Wilson. And I believe that's the title topic of today's show is, should the Denver Broncos move forward with Russell Wilson in 2024, or should they utilize the one exit avenue that they have to get out of this Russell Wilson deal? We had Zach Seegers on the podcast many weeks ago, and he talked about how if there's one opportunity for the Denver Broncos to get out of this deal, it's now, because as we've been hammering on this show, if Russell Wilson is on the roster by the 5th day of the 2024 league year, his 2025 salary, I originally thought it was the whole kibosh at $50 million. Apparently, according to Andrew Mason, it's just the $37 million base salary, but that's still a very large amount of money against the Denver Broncos cap. So I'm not sure if it's the 55 or if it is the 37, but either way, it's still a detrimental amount of money to the Broncos cap. This is the one avenue that they have to get out of this Russell Wilson deal.
And I think Zach even used the example of an exit ramp on the highway. Like this is, he goes, if you don't take this exit, there's a long bunch of road between now and when you can actually take the exit. But just to finish up on the game part, and we'll certainly get back to Russell, because boy, Broncos country has really turned on him in the last few days. We're back to the opinion of Russ at 1-5 versus the winning. So the Broncos end up making 2 touchdowns and 2 2-point conversions to tie the game very late. Had an opportunity to win there, but it looked like it sure seemed to me that the Patriots were trying to run out the clock and just get to overtime, and Sean kept calling those timeouts. And what did you guys think of that?
There's a lot of ways you can interpret it, and I don't know if it's the right way or the wrong way. Like the way that I interpret it is, he was wanting to give the offense the ball back, right? He was probably wanting to get the offense the ball back, and so that was one of the reasons why he was calling the timeouts was, because we have to remember too, like at that moment, the Patriots only had 1 timeout. Like the Patriots only had 1 timeout, and the Broncos had 2 or 3 at that point. So I think maybe Sean was just hoping to get the ball back at that point, and then, and then do something with it. That said, though, the possession that we saw from the Broncos once they got the ball was about as conservative as you can ever possibly imagine in do or die situation to win the game. Like it was. So I say all of that because I truthfully don't know what that answer was as far as why he ended up calling those timeouts. Because if you wanted the ball, I would have expected you to do something with it and not, run a screen pass, on, the first down and then run it on the second down, or just do these just obnoxious things that are putting you backwards instead of forwards. So I think that, like, from the Broncos point of view, it's like you may have wanted the ball, but you really seem like you handcuffed yourself, or you're saying without saying that Russell Wilson is not your quarterback, and you were just not comfortable winning this football game with Russell Wilson at quarterback. Like, that's what it almost seemed like from the overall landscape of just that entire situation.
Yep. I mean, it's definitely frustrating, the overall 3-play sequence that led to the 3-and-out prior to that possession. But I still feel like the thought process from Sean Payton was sound in calling that timeout, or the 2 timeouts. He took the one prior to the 3rd down and 3 play. Then right after that is when Pat Surtain gave up a 27-yard back shoulder fade to Devontae Parker. And then one more completion after that was Mike Gesicki to 4 yards, which set up that Patriots field goal. If Pat Surtain doesn't give up that back shoulder fade, if he's in better position to make a play on the ball on that play, then we're not having this conversation right now. So for me, and I tweeted this after the game, it was a good thought process by Sean. It was just bad execution by your best player. And that's something that you really cannot have. It wasn't Pat Surtain's greatest day out there. He got mossed by Devontae Parker twice.
Yeah.
And the aforementioned Chad Ryland drills a 56-yard field goal right down the pipe. I mean, it was
yeah.
After missing a field goal and a PAT earlier in the game.
I know. And that first field goal that he missed was like a real shank. I mean, that was really, really bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Broncos are now, 11th in the AFC and still available to perhaps make a playoff run. But just as the week before, the things that needed to happen didn't. Basically, everything that we needed to happen this week happened, with the exception of the Broncos winning. Yeah. And I just kind of wanted to get your gauge, so to speak, on, what do you want them to make the playoffs at this point? Are you comfortable with the draft order at this point? Like, are you still satisfied with the season? I think there's a lot to take in good from that, but like these last 2 games, where are you guys at?
I'm playing to win.
Yeah. It's tough. I think you always have to play to win, right? You always have to play to win for this team. Now, we're gonna learn a lot this week as far as possibly what's gonna happen, and is Russ not gonna play these next 2 games? Is Jitter Stidham gonna play? I mean, the one thing, yeah, right.
That's a good nickname.
But I think that for the Broncos, like, they are definitely not out of it. They are definitely not out of, playoff contention by any means. But to that same token, they got to have a lot of help, like, and more so than what they had on just one weekend. Like, they got to have a lot of help for them to make the playoffs. And the one thing I was just going to say, though, is, I'm definitely going to be hoping they can gut out these wins, but I tweeted it the day after, or the moment after the game and stuff. When you lose to a 3-1 Patriots team, you don't deserve to be in the playoffs. Like truthfully, you do not deserve to be in the playoffs. And but I think that also that mindset should also not take us away from the progress that's been made this year, right? The progress that's been made this year from the offensive side of things to the defensive side of things. And just knowing the fact that, yeah, maybe some of those miscomings from Sean Payton, haven't looked the best, but there is a sole reason why the Broncos are in this playoff competition, right, or contention, and it is because of Sean Payton. And so he is very clearly the right guy for the job, because there are not many coaches that would have come in here and molded this particular Denver Broncos team into playoff contention the way that Sean has been able to. So a culture has already been laid, and hopefully it's now going to be on that firm foundation, if you will. And I think that for the Broncos, like I think that they're trending in the right direction. I think they are definitely trending in the right direction. The question is just, where are those pieces? Who are those pieces? And where do we go from there?
Absolutely.
And Gage, if I could jump in on this, on Jeff's comment, those 4 losses at home are inexcusable. And I wish I could credit the person that I saw the tweet from that pointed out that the Raiders home loss by 1, Commanders, Jets, and now the Patriots is not the difference between the Broncos making the playoffs. It's the difference between the Broncos winning the AFC West. I mean, Kansas City is just coming unglued at this point. You're seeing their 2 biggest stars throwing helmets in consecutive weeks, just losing their minds. It's an absolute shit show there. And normally it would be fun for us to relish because we could take advantage of it. But some of these losses to teams that we should have won have now still put us, and now we're third in the AFC West, and that was our opportunity to really overtake them with some of these must wins or some of these easy wins or walkover wins. So I wanted to point that out before you made your comment.
For sure, man. And that's ultimately the difference maker. This team doesn't deserve to be a playoff team. If you can't take care of business against inferior opponents like the New York Jets with Zach Wilson at quarterback,
right,
like the Las Vegas Raiders with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, like the Commanders with Sam Howell, who actually diced us up in that game. That was still one of Sam Howell's best games as a pro. And then you think about just especially that Jets game, man. That's the one for me that you could not afford to lose, and they did. And I even had them losing the Commanders game, but the Raiders game and the Jets game are the 2 that you'll look back on and you get haunted. And then when it comes to the Patriots, I feel like there was always trap game potential there because Bill Belichick has a losing I believe he was risking his only team he would have a losing record against or something like that was the Broncos, if I heard that stat correctly. I can't recall exactly what it was. It was the all-time matchup between Bill Belichick and Sean Payton.
Okay.
Bill now has the edge on the all-time matchup between him and Sean Payton. So that was a very personal matchup for him. I feel like he and Sean both have a lot of respect for each other. So I felt like this was going to be a game where the Patriots were always going to be well coached, but they were shorthanded. And they still came in and absolutely decimated the Broncos. Guys like Mike Gesicki stepped up and made plays. Pop Douglas stepped up and made plays. Devontae Parker stepped up and made plays. Ezekiel Elliott absolutely hurtled over Jaquan McMillan for a touchdown. And prior to that, Jaquan got caught out of position. I want to say it was against Pop Douglas for a big completion. Then there was another deep throw that Bailey Zappi had where it was a throw up the seam with Jonathan Cooper in coverage on the tight end Pharaoh Brown. So I thought the Patriots just came in. They were well prepared. They made some plays in the passing game. The Broncos pass rush was infuriatingly frustrating to watch. They did not get home last night or night before last. It was an all-around dud of a performance, and that epitomizes why this team doesn't deserve to make the playoffs. But that said, they're still mathematically alive. And believe it or not, there's still a mathematical chance that they could win the AFC West if they win out and Kansas City loses their final 2 games against the Bengals and the Chargers. Now, is that realistic? Probably not. But until that possibility is dead, we still have to entertain it happening to an extent.
Yeah, well, we'll just continue enjoying and relishing into the fact that Patrick Mahomes is acting like his brother, Jackson Mahomes.
Mm-hmm. And I had mentioned that we were ranked 11th, but ESPN is actually having us at 12th, the last AFC team that's still a potential playoff team. The other 4 have already been eliminated from contention: the Jets, the Tennessee Titans, Chargers, and the Patriots. But Gage, I'm so with you on the earlier games in the year. Mm-hmm. For me, the Commanders game, I thought we would we would win that. But I almost look at that as kind of a wash. We had a huge lead against them. They came back and won. Chicago had a huge lead against us. We came back and won. So I almost look at those as all right. Those were the kind of evened themselves out. But that Jets game, we had no business losing to Zach Wilson at that point. And just even the Raiders game at the beginning. And oddly enough, Will Lutz has been one of our best performers throughout the course of the season. And that was the game where his opening game in regular season game in a Broncos uniform, and he really did not play well, and in fact lost us the game potentially. So Alex has asked us a couple times about why haven't we talked about the timeouts. We actually did touch on it a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where we collectively thought that they were keeping them so we could give Broncos an opportunity to come back and make a play to win. Unfortunately, then the play calling and the sequence of right after that did not really show that was perhaps a strategy. So anyway, but I want to be, so where do the Broncos go right? Coaching, draft, free agency, any. What do you think, guys?
I'd say they got the coaching probably right. There's been a couple of displays where it's like, okay, maybe, but on the whole, it's been a very impressive performance, being able to turn things around from the 1-5 start, getting the guys in the locker room to buy in to what they were trying to build after that 1-5 start. There are many locker rooms that would have completely collapsed and folded after that beginning. So I feel like coaching, especially on the defensive side of the ball with Vance Joseph, I can't believe we're saying that, but I feel like Vance Joseph is building something that you can potentially look towards and say, all right, this could be a good future building block for this team. I feel like, again, Sean Payton, if he finally has a quarterback that he trusts and isn't trying to handcuff, I'm very curious to see what this full open book of a Sean Payton offense would be. Even if he were to get a guy like Jameis Winston in here, who he absolutely maximized in those 6 games that he had him before he tore his ACL in 2021. I want to see what Sean Payton can do with a quarterback that isn't being handcuffed schematically. And then I really think we'll get a full judgment on if the Broncos got it right from a schematic point of view. But I'm very much willing to say, yes, they absolutely did. As far as like draft concerns, I think there's plenty of pieces you could look towards, like Nick Benito, Jonathan Cooper. All right, these could be pieces that you could build off of. I don't know if any of those guys are true alpha number 1 edge rushers, but they're certainly really good building blocks for this team moving forward. Free agency, you think about Zach Allen, who's been a good addition for this defensive line. Outside of him, though, this entire front 7 needs to be rebuilt. So to kind of pivot away from John's question a little bit, it's like, I think that this offseason is where we'll really get a showcase of, are the Broncos heading in the right direction or not? So I almost want to say this is an incomplete for John's question, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and actually to further that a little bit, I feel like the best way to kind of like explain it would be like, and I know John does the CCF show, right? So in a college show, he would probably get this reference, but I feel like what I'm getting ready to say is, like, if you're building a foundation and you are building the structure of your team, it would be the free agency, the offseason that you just had. So it would be this last one with Mike McGlinchey, Ben Powers, Zach Allen. Like, it would start from there. And then, of course, you would build off of that with your second offseason, right? Because I think that, so much so when we think about those Manning years, right? It was the 2012 draft that really set them up beautifully for that Super Bowl 50. And then, of course, it was the 2013-2014 free agency with DeMarcus Ware, Aqib Talib, Emmanuel Sanders. So, I mean, that very famous free agency really set them up nicely for what was about to come as far as with that Denver Broncos team. So I agree. I think, but it's about building off of what just happened this last free agency. So this in the 2022 or 2023 free agency and the 2024 free agency will be big as far as establishing the foundation for what will be this team. And I think you might see a little bit more stuff across the board as far as maybe with where they go. I think if there's any way to probably look about it as far as from either the offensive side or defensive side, from my vantage point, I would rather them build the wide receiver room through the draft. Unless there's someone that is just really standing out, that is a true number one guy that you just unfortunately saw hit the market that you've got to kick your tires on. That's going to be, certainly what you got to do. Another one is, of course, the interior defensive line. DJ Jones has played exceptionally well these last few games, but the front seven in general has just been up and down, and it's basically maybe your weakness, right? It's your weakness, if you will, of that defense. So upgrading the interior defensive line, and maybe even going that route as well into the NFL draft. And so I think, certainly looking at that as far as the possibility, the secondary, and when I say the secondary, I mean, the cornerback room, the safety room, even with the loss of Kareem Jackson, the regression, if you want to even call it regression, of De'Aaron Turner-Yo, I think impacts things. And obviously the health of Caden Stearns, what does that, have in store? What is the future of Caden Stearns? So upgrading the safety room a little bit, bringing more of that depth in. So they do have some pieces as far as what they can, certainly go after and address. But I'm 100% in agreement that between this last offseason that they had and this one is truthfully going to be the biggest ones that Sean Payton's going to have.
And when Gage was talking about getting the right coach and the culture and getting these players to buy in, one of the scariest things for me as a fan is when the team is struggling, when the team has a whole string of losing seasons, that's not an attractive place as a free agent. And you can throw a large contract at somebody and you may entice them with money, but the true competitors that can make the money and also want to play for a winner are not going to look at you. And even with the record being under 500 as it stands right now, I do think that the Broncos are an attractive destination moving forward. And so no matter what happens the rest of the year, I do think that, a lot of it depends on the cap and what we have for space and who we resign. But I think that we are going to be able to be good recruiters for free agents moving forward. It's not only an attractive team and leader is, we've got the richest owners in the NFL. They're going to be building a brand new practice facility and headquarters. And so there's a lot of good that's going on. So I look forward to seeing what the free agent class looks like moving forward. And, that does make me ask the question as far as like any players that you think that the Broncos would potentially trade in the offseason. I think Cortland Sutton is definitely no longer in those discussions, but I don't know about you guys, but I don't see Jerry Jeudy being on this team next year.
I have to agree with that.
Yeah, it's a conversation that needs to be had. I mean, we've mentioned about how he may still be if it was Sean Payton, but I mean, like, you would think that with the way that games are going on and the targets running very few and far between with Jerry Jeudy, is he in the future plans, right? Like, is he in the future plans? And plus, as much as I love Jerry Jeudy, right? Like, everybody knows I'm a big Jerry Jeudy fan. You can replace a position like that in the draft, which is one of the reasons why I'm a big proponent of, going out and addressing that wide receiver position in the draft. And not to mention this last class, the class before that, and then this one upcoming are really, really good wide receiver classes. So if you have any possibility of, bringing the depth into your room, this is the class to do it. So if you want to double up, triple up on wide receiver, I would not hesitate one bit if they wanted to do something like that.
I agree. I feel like you're probably going to address skill position of some variety or another in the draft, be it wide receiver or tight end. That's another one that I think the Denver Broncos have to find a dynamic playmaker. Greg Dulcich, unfortunately, can no longer be depended on moving forward. Any production you get out of him moving forward is house money. Those injuries just continue to stack up, from the chronic hamstrings to now this foot injury. This is something that you can no longer contend with moving forward. So I really feel like you're going to have to find somebody else in the draft at tight end or free agency. But if you are anywhere in striking distance to get a Brock Bowers, you do it. You absolutely do it, because I feel like he can bring that sort of dynamic playmaking ability. I also heard through Benjamin Albright the Broncos could be heavily interested in the Alabama corner Kool-Aid McKinstry to pair alongside Pat Surtain, a couple of Alabama guys back there. So that could be another direction, is maybe the secondary in the draft. I think that to address the D line, the Broncos are going to try to go.
Sam, I'm ready for when that happens.
That's right.
Love it. I love it. I just saw a comment about Cam Jordan. I'm curious how Cam would work in this particular defensive scheme, because I know he's historically operated in a 4-3. Would he work, do you think, Cam, as an interior D lineman in a 3-4?
I don't know. I don't think so.
I don't either.
Because I feel like you would probably use him exclusively as just like an edge rusher. You know, so I don't know. And also too, but I will say, as far as the Saints go, you know, we saw this last offseason. We laughed so often when it happened, but there were a lot of Saints players that came over, you know, to be a part of the Denver Broncos and with Sean Payton. So don't be surprised. I'm just saying, don't be surprised if the Broncos have another one of those situations upcoming in the offseason and in free agency where there's a surprise cut, a la Alvin Kamara, right? Like, you know, like a surprise cut or whatever. Like, you know, it's guys like that, you know, possibly, you know, Sean Payton could be interested in, or, you know, just, and I'm only just throwing out names. I'm just not like speculating.
Lattimore?
Yeah, Marshawn Lattimore. You know, so I mean, like it's certainly possible that, I mean, you probably want to keep an eye on some of those players as far as, you know, with the Saints. So I mean, Lucas Kroll, you mentioned about the tight end room. He is a guy that it's worth developing. He's one of those guys that is certainly worth developing. Maybe that's a name. That is a name I think that we should probably pay attention to, not just from the standpoint of the tight end room, but maybe how Sean Payton and this staff feels about him. Because if they don't take a tight end, if you will, you know, high in this draft class, maybe they feel like they would know someone a little bit better, or they really, really like where Lucas Kroll is at, and they feel like, you know, here we go, we can develop this guy into something. Because I mean, that was maybe his best. That's not even a hesitation. That was his best game as a Bronco, and best game as an NFL player. So those are the kinds of things that you build off of. Of course, you know, if you're Peyton, and of course, if you're Lucas Kroll.
So I do need to pivot back to a comment and give it some context from earlier from our fearless leader, Mundungus Creevy. Mike is celebrating one of his son's birthdays today. Miles Clark had a birthday, and one of his gifts was a turtle. So that was I got the turtle. Was not code for anything, but he got the turtle, and we were hoping that it would be some form of a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle name, but he's apparently going with Squirtle, which I don't quite understand that one, but. But happy birthday, Miles. We hope you have a wonderful year, and we'll have Mike on next week. But, you know, just going back to the comments, Alex, did you see anything wrong with Sean Payton's play calling? If so, what are some things that could be done to get it right?
Oh, man, this kind of goes back to the conversation, maybe our main conversation, truthfully. Like the main question that we ask about this, and that is, will Russell Wilson be back here next year? Because I think that, like, do I feel like something is wrong with Sean Payton's play calling? I do, but I feel like it's about how limited Russell Wilson is maybe right now with where things are currently at. But then the thing that is just so frustrating is, you know, is he also holding a little bit, and I say a little bit of a grudge with Russ, because you know, Russ has been so successful when he scrambles out of the pocket and he makes things, you know, play when he's off script. But we know, and we've seen it with Drew Brees when he's at quarterback, Sean Payton is a big proponent of a schedule quarterback, not an off-schedule quarterback, a schedule quarterback. And Russell Wilson is not a schedule quarterback. He's an off-schedule quarterback. And so he's really making it work right now with Russ. I think what's so frustrating is when you see the amount of screens that are being called, is that just simply due to because of the lack of running game? Is that simply due to the fact that maybe you don't trust Russell to spread the ball down the field and, use every single blade of grass and, stretch the field, from the middle to the, to the outside numbers? I mean, like, are you not trusting him enough? Like, so that's true. That's what it feels like. That's what it feels like, is that you feel like Russell Wilson, is not necessarily your quarterback. So it's an indictment on him, truthfully. And so I don't know if it's not, because I feel like there's been so often at times, like throughout this season, that Sean Payton has actually called a really, really good game. But then there's moments where you kind of maybe see some of that with Russ, and even Sean Payton, they're like, does he really trust him enough? Like, does he really trust him enough?
Now, looking at Jeff's comment about the dump offs for losses, I am a huge fan of the screen pass. I think the Patriots earned multiple Super Bowls based on their ability to run a successful screen. But these passes that are 7-8 yards behind the line of scrimmage are absolutely driving me batty at this point. And, there's no momentum on it. They're behind the line so far that it's almost impossible, unless the blocking really comes together, to get any sort of positive yardage on those plays. And those should be ones where, like, a Jaleel McLaughlin is like, in full stride receiving that ball.
Yep. And Jaleel caught a bubble screen in that game and actually took it for a few yards. Like, there are many different kinds of screens that you can use. You can obviously use halfback screens. You can use swing passes. You can use tight end screens, play action screens. That's something I feel like we need to see more of with Jaleel in particular. Bubble screens. There are all kinds of different screens that the Broncos can utilize. So if you're going to use a bunch of screens, for me, it's all about mixing them up and trying to figure out which ones are working schematically. So for me, if you're going to use that type of mindset of getting the ball out of Russ's hands quickly with these screen passes, or even some of these screens that are a little bit longer developing, like some of these halfback screens where you let a defensive lineman in and then throw it over his face into the field. That's something that I just feel like we're not quite seeing enough of. And the question pivots back to, is it Russell Wilson or is it something else? Like, we're seeing a lot of screens, but I just don't feel like we're seeing them with like a formula behind them, if that makes any sense. Like, there's no tactical strategy.
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Cam.
Like, it's schemed. Like, I was just like, it's, yeah.
For me, that's just what I feel like we're not seeing with it. It's just not being schemed correctly.
Yeah.
Right. And it's, and Jeff mentioned that Russ panics a little bit, and believe me, I'm a Russ fan. I am not down on him at all. I think, look at his numbers. He still is having a very, very solid season, but he does look more skittish now than he did earlier on in the season. And I'm not quite sure what that's about. Is Peyton just so all over him behind the scenes that he's just afraid of, like, screwing up to face the wrath of the coach? He's a grown man. I don't know if that has some sort of effect, but he does seem to be kind of skittish, when a play doesn't work out right away. And are you guys noticing that at all?
Yeah. We actually touched on it a little bit earlier today, but it's like, if there was one play that, I will say that there's not often where you can actually see a screenshot of a play and an all 22 of a play and actually know that what Russ was doing was just completely, just the wrong move. Like, to your skittish point, with Russ, it's like his best attribute, his best pro is he can escape out of the pocket. He can make plays out of the pocket. Well, what's his best con? His best con is also he escapes out of the pocket, right? And I think it's like, and so, like, what is his best attribute is also his worst attribute, because and that's the frustrating thing when you do run into scrambling quarterbacks, because it does allow the offensive line, longer to protect, which is, freeing a little bit more for the defensive lineman to get in. However, when you're skittish and you do it so often and you leave a very clean pocket, you're not allowing your read to take place. And on that particular read where Russ is literally when it's a clean pocket and he decides to randomly do a 360 in the pocket and get sacked. Like that is, I mean, I haven't even had the opportunity to even see Tim Jenkins' breakdown of it, but I would imagine that Tim Jenkins is frustrated as all get out to see something like that. Because especially when, even if you look at it, like there are times, and I mean, not to bring Jerry Jeudy too much into this, but there are times where Jerry Jeudy plays are left on the field because of the quarterback play. And so that particular play, if you actually go back and look at it, Jerry Jeudy was crossing the field there where he actually had Jeudy crossing. And so if he doesn't do his dipsy do or whatever, his 360, slam dunk competition, whatever you want to call it, like, he could actually hit Jeudy there if he just stays in the pocket and doesn't even have the jitterbug feet.
And Troutman was going to be open on the other side, cutting in as well. So, I mean, that play was just a complete disaster. But, we got to move on as far as these next 2 weeks. It's hard to believe that the season is already this far in. Again, the Broncos are at 7-8, and we have the Chargers for our home finale. Chargers with Easton Stick as quarterback, surprisingly played well against the Bills this past weekend. Had a real opportunity to win that game, but it came up short. But what do you guys foresee this game looking like?
At this point, you got nothing to lose. And, and maybe that's a good thing in this sense, is that the Broncos really have nothing to lose. And so if you're really hoping for the playoffs and, not being mathematically eliminated, you got nothing to lose. And you're playing against Easton Stick, who you absolutely demolished. Now, granted, he maybe played a bit better than Justin Herbert in the game that you played, but but you got a chance to, do something, which is, get a chance to win your final home game of the season and send the fans home happy.
Yep, absolutely. This is your opportunity to win out your last 2 games and clinch your first winning season since 2016. That's going to mean a lot to this fan base if they are able to do that, even if they fall short of the playoffs, just to finally have that monkey off of their back. And we can go into this first off season after year 1 of Sean Payton and go, all right, he led the Broncos to a winning record after starting the season 1-5. As far as the Chargers game, I feel like Vance Joseph is going to want to atone for what happened in this New England game, and he's going to probably make Easton Stick's life uncomfortable. He's going to light him up, much like he did in that first matchup. So I'm foreseeing the Broncos going out there, hopefully playing a little bit pissed off after what happened, a 3-11 team coming into their house and beating them the way that they did. If the Broncos show that kind of fight, I'm going to be very, very impressed. So it's all about the young guys getting opportunity to an extent, but it's also about trying to win these final 2 games. So I think that even with this move that the Broncos were intending to make with putting Kareem Jackson on the practice squad, this was a move that signaled that the Broncos are going with a little bit of a youth movement maybe in these final 2 games. And I think we do have to at least have the conversation about what the Broncos will do with Russell Wilson for these final 2 games. I think that if they were going to bench him, we would have heard something from Sean in his Tuesday morning press conference, but we did not. So I'm thinking they're going to roll with Russ for those final 2 games. I don't see any value of playing Jarrett Stidham. Throughout the entire course of training camp, he was outplayed by Ben DiNucci until basically the final 2 weeks, when it was more so a regression from DiNucci than it was Jarrett Stidham taking like this amazing, massive leap. I mean, he looked good in that Rams game, but I wonder how much of that was Jarrett Stidham actually looking good as opposed to him playing a XFL level defense. Right. So this for me is all about seeing what Russell Wilson is able to put on tape in these final 2 games. The decision may have already been made as to what they're going to do with Russell Wilson heading into the offseason, but these final games, for me at least, are Russ's to start. What about you guys?
I think so too. And I guess the fear of certain people that are throwing the Stidham idea out there is that perhaps if Russ gets a catastrophic injury, then all of a sudden we're on the hook for his salary guaranteed and things like that, but we're already going to be paying the guy. So, I think we're 7-8. I mean, like, you got to put your best foot forward. A 9-8 season after a 5-12, where you're firing a coach who was just an absolute debacle the year before. I mean, that's a massive turnaround. Beating some of the teams. Granted, we lost to some weaker opponents, but beating the teams that we did this year. I mean, there's a lot to be said about. We could go toe to toe with some of the elite teams. You mentioned DiNucci, and it'd be interesting to see if he's active for these next two games. Earlier this season, it was, I believe the Saints were the ones trying to sign him off of the practice squad, and he ended up staying. But I believe there was a gentleman's agreement with the Broncos, because he would have gotten some game checks from the Saints before their suspended backup quarterback came back. And so I believe there's a gentleman's agreement that he would get 3 game checks, and he's already been active for one of those, and there are 2 games left. So I would think that the 53 will have Ben DiNucci on both weeks.
Yep. I think that's a fair statement. And for me, I know this never would happen, but if they're going to bench Russ, I'd rather play DiNucci than play Stidham.
Yeah, and that was one of those cases where it was kind of in the camp of DiNucci, or if he was in Stidham, like with the whole training camp thing. But and with Russ, it's like, you do still have a lot to play for. You have a lot to play for. I think it was really easy, like myself included. Like, it was really easy for myself, like the moment the game happened against the Patriots, for you to be like, oh, I think it might be time to actually, play Jarrett Stidham. But I think that, like, because again, we're talking about the moment, like the moment the game, like as it's happening, the moment it happens, like, so, but you still have a lot to play for. As you guys said, you have a chance to go to 9-8, and if anything, and that is, building up a resume for him to even stay in Denver, it's beneficial to still, have him out there and have him be, the guy that you can continue to roll with. Because, let's just say, for the sake of argument, he is here next year, right? Like, he is here next year, going 9-8 after the year that you just had last year with Nathaniel Hackett. To go out and put forth a winning season will give you alone a really good confidence going forward. But then at that point, you just hope that Sean Payton can expand the offense just a little bit more with Russ, and having him see the field a little bit more, after this, this next season. So, but I think it's going to be one of those cases where, I guess, even to that point, that's the other thing, I guess, that I would be really curious of with Russell Wilson, is that how much do they open this up? Because as we said earlier, like, when they were down 23-7, you dug yourself a hole, but that's exactly the way that you want your offense to look. That is exactly the way that you want your offense to look, and, through the air, and of course, running the football. So if they look like that, like in nearly that moment, as far as the Chargers game and the Raiders game, if they look like that these next 2 games, there will be questions, myself included, which will be, you guys have been theoretically eliminated from the playoffs, not just yet, but theoretically eliminated from the playoffs, and you choose to do this now, right? Mm-hmm. You choose to do this now. And so there's a part of me that feels like maybe the Broncos are finally going to start opening things up, the offense with Russ, and we're actually going to see the chance where Russ is actually going to cook these next 2 games, and people are going to be like, oh, you know what happened here? So I think there is a chance where things are going to be a little bit wonky from the Broncos fans' perspective, and even the Broncos' perspective, to where it's like, if he does do what he's about to do possibly in these next 2 games, now you're going to be like, what's the scene from Dumb and Dumber, and totally redeem yourself. Yeah. Like it's going to get to be that point again.
Is it going to be like the final 2 games of last year, where Russell was cooking in those last 2 games? I think, maybe with nothing to lose, Sean Payton is going to give Russ the big walk, give him the big spoon, and be like, all right, buddy, go cook. You better make us a gourmet meal.
Big walk. I know. I thought Cam was going there. You're telling me there's a chance, like a 5% playoff chance at this point. When had we won, it would have been, almost a lock. We would have made it. But looking at the extended forecast for Denver on Sunday, it looks to be a high of 45 and sunny, so weather doesn't appear to be an issue. That being said, score predictions, fellas.
Well, it's not going to be at one point 23-7, Chargers. I don't think, but I think it's going to be. I think the Broncos win by double digits in this. I think they win by double digits. I think that they pull one out, and I think they win 27-10.
I was going to go 24-10.
All right, I'm also going 27, but I'll give the Chargers the benefit of the doubt that they can stick an extra touchdown on the board. So I got 27-17. So all three of us have the Broncos winning. But
yeah,
that we've already gone over the hour point, fellas. Do you have any other comments you'd like to make or bring up?
No, just I'm really curious to see how this all shakes out with Russ. And this is not the end of our conversation by any means, because we'll be having this conversation maybe next episode, or even the future episodes, of course, within the off season. So, but I'm really looking forward to it. I think that in a very sick and twisted way, if they move on from Russ, I'm always excited about the off season. So if they do, I'm always excited about the what the future of the team does in the off season, what they do in the draft. And, I'm now going to be getting into the mode of, looking at some draft prospects a little bit more, because it's right around bowl season, when it's basically like the March Madness season of looking into prospects. I'm looking in, so kind of doing that. So, but it's an exciting time. And I think that Broncos country should be excited too, because it's this team has a chance to still go out and get a winning record. And even if they don't per se, they still left a lot out there on the field to show they are an improved football team since 2022. So Broncos country, I would absolutely be excited for the future.
Yep. And even if this season doesn't end how we want it to, I mean, obviously playoffs probably aren't on the horizon for the Denver Broncos. This is one of the most fun seasons I've had covering the team, and the most fun I've had being a fan of the team in a long time, probably since the Super Bowl season. Being able to beat Kansas City at home, that was such a special memory. Being able to go into Buffalo and get that win the way we were able to, just thinking you lost it, and then the 12-man penalty. We've put together some very impressive games on the season. It's been so much fun to be a part of, and it showcases that the Denver Broncos are building something here. Although it may take a little bit of time to get it truly where we want it to be, the Broncos are building something. And this is the first offseason that I'm heading into really feeling like the Broncos could sculpt this into something special if they play their cards right. And maybe Russ sees that, and maybe Russ is like, okay, I'm willing to take a bit of a haircut off my contract here to help facilitate this. I think Russ wants to be a part of this. So that's the conversation that we'll definitely have in many shows down the road as we head into the off season. But I think the grass is definitely turning greener, Broncos country. I really do.
I agree. I would agree with both of your assessments on that. Real quick, if you guys want to plug what you have going on this week with your other shows, go for it.
Yeah, we got Mainly Broncos back on schedule, right? Now back on schedule. We're back on Wednesdays at 7:30. We're looking forward to breaking down the Broncos game just a little bit more. Yeah, we've had guests on the last couple of weeks. We had Brandon Keckler, who, if for anybody that didn't get a chance to catch that episode, he actually did a podcast with Sayer at one point. He did the Knights of Den podcast with Sayer and Rochelle Hamilton Jr. He does a YouTube channel himself. So it was nice to get a chance to get him on. So I think, but this week will be guest free. There's no guests. Except for, of course, our famous listeners, of the Mainly Broncos podcast and MHRT Network. So, but yeah, so we just same old.
Yep. And then me, you can find Broncos Syndicate on YouTube. We bring daily Broncos news updates, highlights, film analysis, all that good stuff. And you can also find me on my other YouTube channel, Sparkin Sports NFL. We do play breakdowns for all the other teams in the NFL. We talk some Broncos over there as well. We break a lot of controversial penalty calls down, just a lot of stuff like that. Also some film analysis stuff over there. So please be sure to come check me out on both channels. I would really appreciate it.
Check them out.
Check him out. And I got to thank all the people that joined us in the chat today. It was very lively. We love pulling up your comments and being able to piggyback on them and offer our opinions on what you have to say as well. So thank you so much for doing that. We are on the MHRT network. We have a bunch of shows that are a part of the network. So something for everybody. As Cam mentioned, he's on tomorrow. Sports Nonsense and Whiskey is on in the next few minutes, actually. So please join, like, subscribe, share the works. You guys know the drill. But thanks for joining us tonight. We will be back next Tuesday, same time, same channel, and let's go Broncos.
Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger. Fast lane when I pass in the street, bag of money in the passenger seat. Simcoe's been asking for me.